Once you master the back stream point, curing cervical spondylosis becomes very simple. Kyle Lincoln said casually. The back stream point. Yes, you're absolutely right. The back stream point plays a significant role in treating stiff necks and periarthritis of the shoulder. It's also indispensable for cervical spondylosis. I can't believe this old man has lived so many years and is still outdone by a young person. Looks like I still have much to learn. Kyle Lincoln, my name is Henry Gold. Just call me Mr. Gold. If you ever need anything at the medical room, feel free to come to me. The old man smiled warmly at Kyle Lincoln. Kyle Lincoln nodded and asked, Mr. Gold, what was the name of the male doctor from earlier? Him. His name is Benjamin Lee, also a doctor in our medical department. Why, do you have an opinion about him? Henry Gold looked at Kyle Lincoln, seemingly intrigued as he asked. No opinion. It's just that everyone heard the bet earlier, and I simply want to keep my promise. Kyle Lincoln sneered, tapping the armrest of his chair as he spoke. Kyle Lincoln, you're new to the medical department and still unfamiliar with many things. I think you should just let this go. I heard your bet earlier, but making someone kneel in front of a crowd might not be appropriate. How will Benjamin Lee continue to live at the medical academy after that? Listen to this old man, let this matter slide. Henry Gold sighed, patting Kyle Lincoln on the shoulder. Kyle Lincoln frowned. Henry Gold was a friend of William White, and if he didn't show Henry any respect, William would surely scold him harshly later at home. If this were the 25th century, Kyle Lincoln wouldn't have cared about Henry Gold's words, it would have been a given. But now, in the 21st century, the Order of the Celestial Physicians didn't exist, and Kyle Lincoln was just an ordinary young man. Fine, I'll listen to Mr. Gold. He doesn't need to go to the stadium, but he must kneel and call me grandfather. I'm doing this just to teach him a lesson, that there are always others stronger than you, and the sky above is vast. A doctor's most important quality is medical ethics, not arrogance. Kyle Lincoln said seriously, looking at Henry Gold. A young man capable of speaking such profound words left Henry Gold slightly surprised, unsure of how to respond. All right, I won't meddle in this anymore. Go find Benjamin Lee yourself. Henry Gold sighed, stood up, and left the medical department. Kyle Lincoln sneered, greeted a nearby doctor, and then got up to leave the medical department. The basement had a total of 6 rooms. Aside from Henry Gold's private lounge, the rest were medical rooms divided into 2 sections, Eastern medicine and Western medicine. However, in the 21st century, Western medicine was still dominant. Among the 5 medical rooms, only 1 was for Eastern medicine, while the others were for Western medicine. Kyle Lincoln was currently in the first medical room, a Western medicine room, while Benjamin Lee was in the third. Kyle Lincoln glanced at the signs to confirm the direction of the third medical room and strode forward. Bang! Just as Kyle Lincoln reached the door of the medical room and was about to enter, a figure suddenly rushed out from inside. The hallway was already narrow, making it difficult for 2 people to pass side by side. With someone suddenly dashing out, it was impossible for Kyle Lincoln to dodge. He collided forcefully with the figure, and both tumbled onto the hallway floor. Ouch! A furious cry rang out, accompanied by a faint fragrance that wafted into Kyle Lincoln's ears and nose. 2 soft, full forms pressed firmly against his chest. Soft, bouncy, fragrant, full, 4 adjectives instantly popped into Kyle Lincoln's mind. Without even looking, he could determine the gender of the person now on top of him. Having just used the 9 needles of the sun god, Kyle Lincoln's body was somewhat weakened. The fall had taken a toll, leaving him unable to get up from the ground. However, the girl in Kyle Lincoln's arms quickly struggled to stand up. The soft, firm sensation from her chest against him disappeared, leaving Kyle Lincoln with a sudden sense of loss. Sorry, are you okay? A clear, melodious voice carrying a faint fragrance reached Kyle Lincoln's ears, making him savor the moment as he opened his eyes and looked ahead. Kyle Lincoln lay on the ground, while the girl beside him crouched down to check on him. Her short black skirt beneath a white blouse came into his view, offering him a glimpse of her slender legs and the scene beyond. Pink. Kyle Lincoln unconsciously murmured. Ah. The girl quickly covered her skirt, hiding the pink glimpse of springtime. Her face turned bright red as she stood up. The girl was stunningly beautiful, with willow-like eyebrows, sparkling eyes, and pearly white teeth. Her gentle and serene demeanor was like a painting, captivating anyone who looked into her bright eyes. Her rosy complexion added to her charm, making one feel an irresistible urge to lean closer. Her figure was equally flawless, with graceful curves and a petite yet alluring frame that evoked a protective instinct in men. Her full, rounded chest seemed on the verge of bursting forth, compelling one to reach out as though to prevent any mishap. Her long, slender legs, exposed to the air, were as smooth and white as jade, making it hard for anyone to look away. Kyle Lincoln swallowed hard and tried to stand up, his eyes fixed on the girl's face. Feeling shy under Kyle Lincoln's gaze, the girl lowered her head and softly said, "My name is Julia Monroe. If you're okay, I'll take my leave. If you need anything, you can find me at the infirmary in room 3, I work there." With that, Julia Monroe quickly walked away. "Julia Monroe, what's wrong? Why are you yelling? Did someone? You scoundrel, so it's you." Kyle Lincoln didn't call Julia Monroe back, but suddenly, a figure in a white coat appeared in the doorway of room 3 in the infirmary. The previously calm voice turned sharp upon seeing Kyle Lincoln. "Oh my, so it's Benjamin Lee," Kyle Lincoln said mockingly, a glint of disdain flashing in his eyes. "I was wondering what kind of creature could make such a loud noise." Benjamin Lee's already dark expression grew even darker, especially when he noticed Julia Monroe watching him. His eyes seemed to blaze with anger as he glared at Kyle Lincoln, his fists clenching tightly. "You bastard, let me tell you something. Don't push your luck. If you know who I am, you should understand that staying in the infirmary means behaving yourself. Don't think that just because Professor Alexander Gold is protecting you, you can act recklessly," Benjamin Lee said angrily to Kyle Lincoln. Kyle Lincoln put on an innocent face, quickly waving his hands. "Dr. Lee, I didn't mean it that way. Don't misunderstand me." Hearing Kyle Lincoln's words, Benjamin Lee's expression softened slightly. He nodded and said, "Good, as long as you understand. Let me warn you, stay away from Julia Monroe. If you dare to harm her, don't expect to have a place in the infirmary." Kyle Lincoln nodded quickly, glancing at Julia Monroe and then at Benjamin Lee, a sly glint flashing in his eyes. "Julia Monroe, are you okay? Did he bully you? If he did, just tell me, and I'll deal with him right away." Benjamin Lee strode up to Julia Monroe, puffing out his chest and trying to appear heroic. Julia Monroe lowered her head, her face turning even redder. She didn't dare look at Kyle Lincoln and softly said, "It's not what you think. He didn't bully me. Don't worry, as long as I'm in the infirmary, no one will dare to bully you. You will always be the safest person. From now on, when you're by my side, you'll always be the safest." Benjamin Lee patted his chest, his face full of assurance. I haven't agreed to anything with you." Julia Monroe quickly raised her head to explain, sneaking a glance at Kyle Lincoln as she spoke. "Don't worry, sooner or later, you'll agree to be with me. No one can make you feel as secure as I do, and no one will love you like I do. I guarantee it." Benjamin Lee hurriedly grabbed Julia Monroe's shoulders, his face anxious. Julia Monroe tried to pull away from Benjamin Lee's grasp, but being a man, Benjamin's strength far exceeded hers. Despite her best efforts, she couldn't break free. "Dr. Lee, the reason I came here today is that I have something important to discuss with you." Suddenly, Kyle Lincoln spoke up, addressing Benjamin Lee loudly. Benjamin Lee, who was on the verge of succeeding in his persuasion, was interrupted by Kyle Lincoln. Instantly furious, he turned and pointed at Kyle Lincoln, shouting, "Can you just stop talking? Who do you think you are? This has nothing to do with you. Can't you see I'm busy? Whatever you have to say, wait until later. No, it has to be now. If I don't say it now, there won't be a better chance later. Dr. Lee, earlier in infirmary room number 1, I woke up that female student. You haven't forgotten the bet between us, have you?" Kyle Lincoln waved his hand urgently, his face serious as he stared at Benjamin Lee. Benjamin Lee froze, immediately recalling the bet he had made with Kyle Lincoln. "Let me tell you something, don't push your luck. It was just a joke, nothing serious. Let's just let it go. I'm willing to drop this matter, and we can call it even." Benjamin Lee, flustered, quickly responded to Kyle Lincoln. #### Chapter 23, In the Underground Chamber, Call It Even. What did I ever do to you? The earlier misunderstanding with Julia Monroe happened because she accidentally bumped into me. She was the one at fault, and she already apologized. There's no conflict between us. I don't want any trouble with you either, Dr. Lee. So, I think it's only fair for you to follow through with our bet. Of course, I'm not unreasonable. All you need to do is kneel and call me Grandpa once. Or, if you'd prefer, you can kneel in the training ground and call me Grandpa. It's up to you, your choice. Kyle Lincoln said loudly, his expression indifferent as he looked at Benjamin Lee. Benjamin Lee's face turned pale, then flushed, as he glanced at Julia Monroe, who was covering her mouth, trying not to laugh. His expression grew even more unpleasant. Kyle Lincoln. Dr. Lee, please don't call me so affectionately. It makes me uncomfortable. Besides, Julia Monroe is still here. If she misunderstands, that wouldn't be good. Kyle Lincoln quickly stepped back, ignoring Benjamin Lee's darkening face, and spoke loudly. Pfft. Julia Monroe couldn't hold it in any longer. Despite trying to cover her mouth, she burst into laughter. Benjamin Lee clenched his fists tightly, the sound of his knuckles cracking as he glared at Kyle Lincoln, wishing he could punch him right then and there. As just an Eastern medicine practitioner, perhaps with some acupressure techniques, Benjamin Lee genuinely felt a bit afraid that Kyle Lincoln might suddenly make a move on him. Dr. Lee, a bet is a bet. You've already wagered, so if you're a man, accept it gracefully. Otherwise, tell me, how will you live in the infirmary later? Kneeling down and calling me Grandpa isn't that embarrassing, is it? Kyle Lincoln shrugged, his face innocent. Benjamin Lee nearly ground his teeth to dust, but with Julia Monroe watching nearby, he didn't dare lose his temper. In the end, he nodded reluctantly. Fine, fine. I admit defeat. You're something else. If you don't want to live, then I don't need to give you a chance either. With that, Benjamin Lee truly knelt down on the ground and quickly called Kyle Lincoln, Grandpa. A man like that, can he really make you feel safe? Kyle Lincoln said to Julia Monroe before standing up and walking out. Julia Monroe watched Kyle Lincoln leave, then glanced at Benjamin Lee, who was getting up. Without a word, she rose and walked out as well. Julia Monroe, listen to me. It's not what you think. Benjamin Lee hurriedly reached out, trying to stop Julia Monroe, but she paid him no attention and simply left the wine cellar. Standing in the hallway, Benjamin Lee's eyes burned with fury, his fists clenched tightly. Kyle Lincoln, what goes around comes around. I'll make sure you taste retribution. Benjamin Lee roared, turning and heading back to his office. Today was the first day of interviews, so there wasn't much to do. Kyle Lincoln familiarized himself with his surroundings before leaving Mid-Sea Academy of Healing and heading toward White's Wandering Kitchen. Mid-Sea Academy of Healing was indeed full of beautiful women, each with their unique charm. Walking along the path, Kyle Lincoln found himself dazzled, almost unable to control himself. The 9 needles of the sun god technique he had just begun practicing made it difficult to control his initial power, so Kyle Lincoln often faced issues he couldn't yet manage. Suddenly, the appearance of a handsome stranger caught the attention of many medical academy students, who kept glancing at Kyle Lincoln and signaling to him. Kyle Lincoln, however, didn't approach anyone to chat. After all, he'd be working at Mid-Sea Academy of Healing in the future. There would be plenty of time to enjoy the scenery in this garden. White's Wandering Kitchen wasn't far from Mid-Sea Academy of Healing. After a 30-minute walk, Kyle Lincoln arrived at the restaurant's entrance. Good heavens, what's going on here? Why are there so many people? As soon as he reached the door, Kyle Lincoln saw White's Wandering Kitchen packed to the brim with people. Inside, rows of patrons were on tiptoes, craning their necks to see something. After hesitating for a moment, Kyle Lincoln pushed the door open and stepped inside. Don't push. Everyone, don't push. 325 per glass, 325 per glass. If you want a drink, just fork over the cash and call out your number. The drinks will be brought to your table. But our stock is limited, our master bartender isn't back yet, so there might only be a few glasses left. Seize the chance. A lively voice rang out from inside. William White, holding a beer bottle, waved it around enthusiastically. I want one. I want one. I want one. Don't fight me for it. I was here first. I'll pay 350. 350, my foot. I'll pay 400. I'll take them all, whatever's left, I'll buy it all. As soon as William White finished speaking, a chorus of shouting erupted inside White's Wandering Kitchen. Red banknotes fluttered through the air, making William White's eyes gleam with excitement, his mouth nearly watering. Bianca White glared at William White from inside, her face full of discontent, clearly unhappy with William White's high pricing. Kyle Lincoln didn't rush over either. He stood in a corner, watching as the fragrant wine elixir, which could only produce a few bottles of beer, was completely sold out by William White, who was counting money tirelessly. Only then did Kyle slowly make his way inside. Kyle Lincoln, oh my little ancestor, you're finally back. Look, all these people are here for your wine. Hurry up, go make some more. We're completely out now. Make a few more bottles of that stuff, there are still so many regulars who haven't had a chance to drink. As soon as William White saw Kyle Lincoln, his eyes turned into dollar signs. He rushed over, grabbed Kyle Lincoln's arm, and spoke. Kyle Lincoln quickly pulled his arm back, shivering as he said, Uncle William, what are you doing? I'm a decent man, I can't accept this kind of behavior. Get lost. Who wants to mess around with you? Hurry up, go make more wine for me. Better yet, make a variety of flavors so we can sell even more. William White impatiently gave Kyle Lincoln a push. Kyle Lincoln sneered. As long as he was useful, William White would never drive him away. Especially now, when he was the old man's money-making machine, William White would definitely hold on to him tightly. Fine, I can make it for you, but let's be clear, you are not allowed to disturb me while I work, okay? Alright, little ancestor, whatever you say. Now go. The customers outside are waiting. William White interrupted Kyle Lincoln and shoved him into the wine storage room. Kyle Lincoln closed the door, shook his head helplessly, and hurried to the back of the wine barrels. He looked at the flourishing inebriating blossom plants inside, carefully watered a maiden's blush, and then sat down beside it, meditating to absorb spiritual energy. Kyle Lincoln's cultivation level was still low, and the spiritual energy from the inebriating blossom was sufficient for him to absorb. In less than half an hour, Kyle Lincoln had recovered to his peak state. Fragrant Blossom's water was quite easy to brew. Kyle Lincoln adjusted the technique slightly, creating some new flavors. Slowly, he opened the door and walked out of the storage room. Inside White's wandering kitchen, it was deathly silent. All eyes were fixed on Kyle Lincoln. The moment he stepped out, everyone's eyes lit up, staring intently at the small bottles in his hands. Are these people all wine maniacs? How can they go crazy over something like this? Kyle Lincoln looked confused. In the 25th century, this type of wine was essentially the cheapest kind, something that ordinary cultivators wouldn't even bother drinking. Thank you, my little ancestor, you've done me a great favor. William White, overjoyed, ran up to Kyle Lincoln, took the small bottles from his hands, and quickly dashed behind the counter. This time, our master winemaker has developed a few new flavors of wine. Everyone is welcome to try them. But this time, the price will definitely be much higher since the costs have changed. 550 coins per glass, who's in? William White, with the face of a cunning merchant, loudly announced to the eager customers in front, completely ignoring the expressions of Kyle Lincoln and Bianca White. I want it. I want it all, no matter the price. Me too. I'll pay whatever it costs. Shouts erupted inside White's wandering kitchen. Outside, even more frantic customers were pushing their way in. On a normal day, White's wandering kitchen was never full, but now it was packed to the brim. Not even a fly could squeeze its way inside. William White couldn't stop laughing, his mouth wide open as he excitedly counted the growing pile of money in his hands. The fragrant blossoms water concocted by Kyle Lincoln sold out in less than 10 minutes, and there were still many people outside who hadn't had a chance to taste it, looking at William White with longing eyes. William White arrogantly counted the money in his hands. A stack like this would have taken him 1 or 2 months to earn before, but now, things were different. He didn't even need to cook anymore, just selling the liquor alone brought in such income. William White, tell your bartender to make some more. We haven't even had a chance to try it yet. Let us have a taste to satisfy our cravings. Exactly, William White. Your shop has such a treasure, why didn't you bring it out earlier? We eat here every day. Some regular customers at the back started grumbling in dissatisfaction. Everyone, good things are worth the wait. Our bartender is already tired today. If we keep pushing him to make more, it might affect the taste and quality. So, come back tomorrow morning. There won't be any more Spirit of the Azure Spring for today. William White laughed heartily and waved them off. Spirit of the Azure Spring? What kind of liquor is that? Kyle Lincoln, standing next to Bianca White, asked curiously. Spirit of the Azure Spring is the name my dad came up with. He said it's brewed with pristine spring water, but this so-called pristine spring doesn't actually exist. That's why he can shamelessly monopolize the liquor you made to make money. Bianca White glared at William White in annoyance. Kyle Lincoln nodded, watching William White chat with a regular customer without saying anything further. Bang! Suddenly, a loud noise came from the entrance of White's wandering kitchen, followed by a group of more than 10 thugs dressed in gaudy clothing barging in. Get out of here, all of you. Today, this place is reserved by young Master Arthur Gold. If you're not afraid of dying, stay seated. Otherwise, get lost. The red-haired thug leading the group shouted at the diners, slamming a steel pipe on the tables repeatedly. Good liquor was, of course, important, especially after paying a hefty price for it. No one wanted to leave it unfinished. But compared to their lives, no one dared to stay. It's young Master Arthur Gold. Let's get out of here. We can't afford to mess with him. That's right. Last time, one of William White's staff hit one of young Master Arthur Gold's men. He must be here for revenge this time. We'd better leave quickly. The murmurs of the crowd filled White's wandering kitchen as everyone hurriedly fled the restaurant, with some even downing the rest of their liquor before rushing out. Hashtag Chapter 24, The Joy of Making Money. This is the end. Young Master Arthur Gold has returned. What should I do? What should I do? William White was so terrified his legs trembled, standing frozen with a pale face. The joy of making money he had just experienced vanished in an instant. "Redhead, I can't believe you still dare to cause trouble. Last time, have you already forgotten what happened?" Kyle Lincoln sneered at the red-haired man, speaking loudly. "I heard that White's wandering kitchen has made tremendous progress, even created a very delicious wine. Is that true?" Outside, a cold voice rang out and a figure swaggered into the restaurant. The entire White's wandering kitchen went silent in an instant. William White, trembling behind the counter, looked toward the door with a terrified expression. When the figure appeared, tears almost welled up in his eyes. For someone as shrewd as William White to show such an expression was highly unusual. Kyle Lincoln was a bit surprised. Who exactly was this person that could frighten William White so much? Kyle Lincoln followed William White's gaze toward the door. A fiery red figure entered. The man wore a bright red coat, buttoned only halfway down, revealing a large tattoo on his chest. He paired it with tight red trousers that clung to his stick-thin legs and red cloth shoes, with the heels not even fully worn. Everything about him exuded a sense of roguishness. The man was strikingly handsome, with a sharp face, a small mustache on his upper lip, and a nose red as if from drinking too much, occasionally twitching as though he had a nasal condition but not severe enough to be cancer. The man swaggered into White's wandering kitchen. Redhead quickly pulled out a chair and respectfully placed it behind him, allowing him to sit. "Ah, so it's young Master Arthur Gold. What an unexpected honor. What wind has brought you to our humble establishment? This truly brings us great pride. If others hear that young Master Arthur Gold has graced our restaurant, White's wandering kitchen's business will surely flourish." William White, with a fawning smile, hurried to greet the man, bowing respectfully. "Cut the nonsense, William White. You old rat." Young Master Arthur Gold immediately interrupted, grabbing William White by the collar. "I heard you've acquired a very fine wine that's become quite popular with your customers. All the wine in White's wandering kitchen used to come from me. Now you're sourcing it elsewhere. Clearly, you don't want to buy from me anymore. Why? Is my product not good enough?" William White trembled with fear, shaking his head fervently, and stammered, "No, no, of course not. Young Master Arthur Gold, you misunderstand. I wouldn't dare. It's just that times are tough, and the business is struggling. Once I have the money, I'll definitely buy more, definitely buy more." Who exactly is this young Master Arthur Gold? How can he be so arrogant? Kyle Lincoln, observing everything from behind, turned to ask Bianca White beside him. "Young Master Arthur Gold? He's just a thug who relies on a bit of local notoriety. He makes his own moonshine, bottles it under fancy labels, and sells it." Chapter 1, 6 Realms of Rebirth. A damp, soft sensation reached his fingertips, accompanied by the strong smell of earth. Kyle Lincoln slowly opened his eyes. The sight before him left him speechless. He was lying in a dirt pit, the ground beneath him loose and soft. Above the pit, trees were densely packed, and a figure stood there. Buried alive. The thought flashed through Kyle Lincoln's mind. He quickly sat up and scrambled out of the pit. Unexpectedly, the figure standing too close to the edge slipped and fell straight down. The sudden turn of events caught Kyle Lincoln off guard. Just as he climbed up, he was forcefully pressed back down. Poor Kyle Lincoln, before he could even think about retaliating, became a cushion for the other person. His head was shoved into the dirt, and the suffocating sensation instinctively made him grab onto the figure. The touch was silky smooth yet firm, like holding onto jelly. The sensation was so perfect that he couldn't help but squeeze twice before reluctantly letting go. What perfect legs! Wait! The figure's legs were on his stomach, so the thing pressed against his face, wasn't it her chest? Only now did Kyle Lincoln notice the sensation on his face. It was distinctly different from elsewhere, unusually soft and exuding a captivating fragrance. It wasn't the scent of any expensive perfume but the natural aroma of a young woman. Ouch, that hurts. A groan escaped as the young woman struggled to get off Kyle Lincoln. Suddenly, as if realizing something, she retreated in fear, stopping only at the edge of the pit. Her trembling finger pointed at Kyle Lincoln. You're dead. Am I dead? But I was definitely poisoned, Kyle Lincoln muttered, startled. He quickly examined himself and was immediately alarmed. The poison had already entered his bloodstream. If not treated in time, it would reach his heart, and even a god wouldn't be able to save him. Ignoring the frightened young woman, Kyle Lincoln lifted his shirt, pinched his index and middle fingers together as if they were silver needles, and began pressing on specific acupuncture points: Great Abyss, Celestial Pivot, Returning Essence, 9 points in total. His movements were so swift that in mere moments, it was done, leaving the young woman covering her mouth, almost screaming. Moments later, Kyle Lincoln felt a surge of heat rising from the 9 points, like a stream of hot spring water coursing through him. Gradually, the heat subsided, and he let out a sigh of relief. The 9 acupuncture points underwent a drastic transformation. From each point, a small amount of viscous fluid seeped out, looking incredibly strange. Amazing! The young woman exclaimed in awe, unable to contain herself. What did you just do? The toxins had been expelled, and naturally, his body was fine. It's just acupuncture, but unlike your acupuncture, I use qi as needles, a much more advanced technique. Kyle Lincoln's complexion became rosy, and he nodded slightly, saying, Let's set this matter aside. Answer me one question: did I owe you money or harass you? Why did you bury me alive? Who buried you alive? When I found you, you were already dead. The young girl's face turned bright red as she muttered softly, I was about to report to the police, but then you faked being dead and dragged me down with you. If I hadn't reincarnated into this body, he really would have been dead. Kyle Lincoln thought to himself, memories flooding back like tidal waves. Kyle Lincoln came from the 25th century, an era of cultivators. According to the history he knew, cultivators already existed in the 21st century. By the 25th century, the wave of cultivation had reached its peak, and almost everyone had become the kind of cultivators once only found in novels. As for himself, he was the master of the Order of the Celestial Physicians. With his cultivation at its peak, he had mastered the 9 needles of the sun god technique up to the 5th level. However, to break through further, he needed to find the world's ultimate treasure, the mystic lunar herb. The mystic lunar herb was an extremely rare plant, often unseen for decades or even centuries. Unable to find it, Kyle Lincoln became obsessed with breaking through. Unwilling to accept failure, he forcibly attempted to break through, only to suffer a qi deviation, endure heavenly tribulation, and fall into the 6 realms of rebirth. The last memory he had was of the icy blue 9-layered heavenly lightning. When he woke up, he had become Kyle Lincoln, who had died from poisoning. This man had the same name as him, but his life was not much better. #### Chapter 2, 9 Needles of the Sun God of the Order of the Celestial Physicians. The Lincoln family he belonged to was once a prestigious clan. Unfortunately, they were sabotaged by enemies, losing their vast fortune. In an attempt to save the family, he took an arranged marriage contract made before their bankruptcy and married into another wealthy family. However, his body was weak, and on his wedding night, he lasted only 3 seconds. The next day, he earned the nickname Mr. 3 Seconds. Afterward, he sought treatment everywhere but could not cure his premature ejaculation. His wife, frustrated, kicked him out of the house. In utter despair, he joined a secret clinical trial project, earning a small sum by testing experimental drugs. After the trial ended, he fainted while strolling down the street. Presumably, the reason he was buried here was that the person in charge of the clinical project discovered he lived alone and, unwilling to take responsibility, simply buried him here, leaving him to fend for himself. If you're fine, then I'll be going. Seeing him lost in thought and silent, the young girl didn't want to stay any longer. She spoke and prepared to climb out of the dirt pit. However, the soil was soft and loose. She exerted uneven force, twisted her ankle, and fell backward. Careful! With a loud shout, Kyle Lincoln quickly reached out to catch the falling young girl. However, he didn't think about where he should or shouldn't touch, and both his hands slipped under her skirt, landing directly on her firm, round buttocks. Sorry. He quickly used his strength to help the young lady regain her balance. As he withdrew his hand, 2 black handprints were clearly visible on the underwear beneath her skirt. The young lady suddenly turned around, her face slightly flushed, her voice a mix of embarrassment and anger. Why are you being so indecent? Let me tell you, I live nearby, and if you dare to act recklessly, I'll find someone to deal with you. Kyle Lincoln let out an awkward chuckle, his eyes darting around. He noticed they were in a forest, not far from a main road, and quickly changed the subject. Where's your house? Let me walk you home. Although the poison in his body had been cleared, he was still dissatisfied with this ordinary human body. He decided to find a quiet place to properly cultivate the 9 needles of the sun god from the order of the celestial physicians. While practicing, he also needed to search for the mystic lunar herb. Even though the chances were slim, he had to try. The failures of his past life must not be repeated in this one. This young lady was the first person he met upon arriving in this world. The impression she left on him wasn't bad, so he decided to follow her home. Why are you following me? The young lady widened her eyes, crossing her arms in front of her chest, which only made her ample bosom appear even more prominent. This girl is wild. I like it. Kyle Lincoln's heart was pure, but his face bore a mischievous grin. Of course, I have ulterior motives. After that, I could even open my own shop. The young lady burst out laughing, unable to hold back her amusement as she teased him. You're so annoying, but why did you try to kill yourself? Kill myself? This girl must have found me after those clinical project managers ran off, so she assumed I committed suicide. Kyle Lincoln pondered for a moment, then a wry smile appeared on his face. He didn't reveal the truth but casually made up a story. I lost my job, my family, and even my girlfriend left me. I was so desperate that I thought I'd just end it all. Kyle Lincoln's performance truly painted the picture of a down-and-out man in the most vivid way possible. There are people worse off than you. Should they all kill themselves too? The girl glared at him, like a teacher scolding a naughty student. Besides, if you die, your girlfriend won't pity you. She'll just look down on you even more. You're right. I should pick myself up, find a better girlfriend, and make her furious. Kyle Lincoln's face lit up with excitement, then he stared at the girl and said, someone like you. TCH, keep dreaming. The girl rolled her eyes before smiling slyly and saying, you seem pitiful enough. I'll take you in. You can work as a servant at my house for now, and we'll see how it goes later. On the way while chatting, Kyle Lincoln learned some basic information about the girl. Her name was Bianca White. Her parents divorced very early, and she had lived with her father since childhood. Their livelihood depended on running the Forest specialty restaurant, William White. Chapter 3, Becoming a Tragedy. Bianca, where have you been? We have an important guest at the restaurant, you need to help me welcome them. A reproachful voice echoed, followed by a short, stout man in his late 40s stepping out of the restaurant. Seeing Bianca White and Kyle Lincoln covered in dirt, William White immediately grew wary. He pulled Bianca behind him and stared at Kyle, demanding, who are you, and why are you with my daughter? Father, he's my friend. He wants to work at the restaurant, Bianca quickly explained. On the way back, I accidentally fell, and he helped me, so he got dirty too. William White's expression immediately shifted. He angrily scolded, this is ridiculous. This small restaurant barely supports the two of us, and now you bring this trouble here. Sorry, we're not hiring. You should look elsewhere. Father. Bianca's face flushed with anger. Ever since she could remember, her father had always been incredibly stingy, to the point where it seemed impossible to change. At that moment, a man stepped out of the restaurant. His demeanor was sharp, and he was dressed impeccably. As soon as he saw Bianca, his eyes lit up, and he smiled, saying, "Bianca, I can help your friend find a job. Don't bother Uncle William anymore." "Ethan Green, why are you here?" Bianca immediately frowned, clearly not having a good impression of the man. William White, however, glared at her and advised, "Bianca, how can you talk to Ethan like that? He's the top student at your medical academy, comes from a good family, and you should network. I mean, learn from him more." Seeing her father treat Ethan Green like his own son, Bianca felt suffocated with anger. Other parents would worry about their children falling in love too early, but her father was the opposite, constantly thinking of ways to push her closer to Ethan Green. Kyle Lincoln remained silent, but he could clearly see the situation unfolding before him. "Hey, looking for a job?" Sensing Kyle's gaze, Ethan Green turned to him with an arrogant tone. "Coincidentally, my pharmacy is short on someone to prepare medicinal decoctions. You can try there. Just say I referred you." A menial job? As the leader of the Order of the Celestial Physicians, Kyle Lincoln couldn't even remember all his disciples, let alone recognize the lowest-ranked menial workers in his sect. And now Ethan Green wanted him to take on such a role. This kind of disdain, how could Kyle Lincoln tolerate it? Kyle Lincoln smirked coldly. "My price is very high. Can you afford it?" Ethan Green raised an eyebrow, the corner of his mouth curling into a sinister smile. He said, "Friend, you should be realistic. Dreaming of grand rewards without real talent will only lead to tragedy." "Who says he doesn't have real talent?" Bianca, recalling Kyle Lincoln's miraculous acupuncture skills, immediately wanted to defend him. Unexpectedly, before Bianca White could finish her sentence, the restaurant was suddenly filled with waves of vomiting sounds, growing louder by the second. Some even collapsed to the ground. "William White, get in here now. These people are suffering from food poisoning," someone cursed loudly, causing William White to turn pale with fear. Forgetting all about Kyle Lincoln, he dashed into the restaurant. Ethan Green, on the other hand, secretly rejoiced, thinking he finally had a chance to shine in front of Bianca White. He smiled and said, "Bianca, don't worry, leave it to me." Watching Ethan Green stride in arrogantly, Kyle Lincoln couldn't help but chuckle. He leaned closer to Bianca White and whispered, "That guy walks unsteadily, his face pale, clearly suffering from kidney deficiency. Don't let his money fool you. Stop talking nonsense. I don't like him at all." Bianca White blushed, playfully punching Kyle Lincoln. Suddenly, she realized, if someone's suffering from food poisoning, it must be my father's responsibility. "Can you help him?" Initially, Kyle Lincoln had no intention of stepping in. With modern medical advancements, unless the poisoning was severe, a simple stomach pumping at the hospital would suffice. However, seeing Bianca White's earnest expression, Kyle Lincoln changed his mind. "If necessary, I'll help." With that, the two of them entered the restaurant. What should have been a pleasant meal had turned into chaos. The tables and floors were littered with people, most vomiting violently. A few diners, in more severe conditions, had rolled their eyes back and fainted. Chapter 4, Treating Illness Through Acupressure. William White was paralyzed with fear, his legs stiff, nearly collapsing to the ground. Ethan Green, who followed closely behind, remained calm and confidently said, "Mr. William, don't worry. Let me handle this." "You brat, what can you do?" an impatient diner shouted angrily. Ethan Green puffed out his chest with pride. "Of course, I'm going to treat them. I'm a top student at the medical academy. If you don't trust me, surely you can trust my student ID, right? He then pulled out a student ID from the medical academy, which not only confirmed his identity but also displayed numerous awards. Fine, then treat them. The diner, unable to argue further, reluctantly agreed. Ethan Green approached one of the patients, pulling out a few silver needles. He inserted them into the celestial pivot, Sea of Chi, and Yin Tomb acupoints, gently twisting the needles. These acupoints were crucial for treating food poisoning. Minutes passed, but the patient remained unconscious, showing no signs of improvement. Strange, aren't these the right acupoints for treating food poisoning? Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Ethan Green began to panic, cold sweat forming on his forehead. They're suffering from intestinal damp heat, but your needles are targeting cold dampness in the intestines. The treatment doesn't match the symptoms, so of course, it's ineffective, Kyle Lincoln squatted beside the patient and softly remarked. Though his voice was low, it was enough to capture everyone's attention. In an instant, all eyes, except those of the patients lying on the floor, turned to Kyle Lincoln. You know nothing, can you stop causing trouble already? Ethan Green said angrily, just about to try another method when Kyle Lincoln directly pulled the needle out. The room suddenly erupted, everyone tensed up, and William White became even more furious, unable to hold back as he shouted, Ethan, do you even know what you're doing? Step aside, or you'll get dragged into this mess. Ethan Green immediately stepped aside, sneering coldly at Kyle Lincoln. If anything happens to them, the responsibility will all be yours. Kyle Lincoln paid no attention to them, his fingers moving deftly as he swiftly pressed 3 acupoints, joining Valley, Celestial Pivot, and Upper Great Void, on the abdomen of the poisoned diner. His movements were smooth and precise, without hesitation. Seeing this, Ethan Green sneered even more. Do you think this is some kind of TV drama? Acupoints? This is ridiculous. The unpoisoned diners began to stir again, and a few hot-tempered ones rolled up their sleeves, ready to drag Kyle Lincoln out. Some even threatened to call the police, and if it weren't for Bianca White's desperate pleas, the authorities might have already been involved. Suddenly, a wet stain appeared beneath one of the nearby diners. Upon closer inspection, it was clear that the person's pants were soaked. William White could no longer stay silent, shouting in alarm, "Why are they all wetting themselves? Are you sure you know what you're doing? Father, stop distracting him." Bianca White pinched William White's waist, worried it might interfere with Kyle Lincoln's acupuncture. Her eyes never left Kyle Lincoln for a moment. "Uncle William, give me a hand and fetch a cold towel," Kyle Lincoln instructed as he stood up and moved to another unconscious diner. The 9 needles of the sun god were incredibly miraculous but required pure yang inner energy as a foundation. After his reincarnation, Kyle Lincoln's mastery of the 9 needles of the sun god had been rendered useless. The pure yang energy in his body was no more than that of an average person. After performing continuous acupuncture, Kyle Lincoln felt his eyelids growing heavy, as though they could close at any moment. The cold towel was necessary to stay alert. If he fainted before saving all the patients, what a disgrace that would be. William White grumbled in dissatisfaction, "I won't join in on this nonsense." "I'll help him," Bianca White retorted, shooting William White a glare. She ran to the kitchen to fetch a towel and went straight to Kyle Lincoln, taking the initiative to wipe his sweat. "Bianca, don't help him. Just look at him, he's completely unreliable. If the patients hold him accountable later, you'll be implicated too." Ethan Green frowned deeply, his expression dark as he watched Kyle Lincoln, as though afraid he might flee. Kyle Lincoln raised his head indifferently and said bluntly, "If I don't treat them, can you cure them?" Ethan Green's facial muscles twitched slightly, and he pointed a finger at Kyle Lincoln, just about to lash out when someone suddenly exclaimed in surprise, "Oh my God, he's actually waking up." The previously unconscious diner sat up in a daze. Seeing the wet patch on his pants, his old face flushed red. Glancing around, he awkwardly asked, "Who splashed water on me?" Chapter 5, The Affectionate Maiden, Saved Your Life, Yet Still So Stubborn. That's my urine you're drenched in, someone teased, quickly shifting their gaze back to Kyle Lincoln, eager not to miss the unfolding drama. Reflecting carefully and taking in the chaotic scene before him, the diner finally realized what had happened. He sincerely looked at Kyle Lincoln and said, "You saved me. Thank you so much. Thank me later. I still have others to save." At this moment, Kyle's face was drained of color, sweat as large as beads continuously streamed down his face. Bianca White, distressed by his state, wiped his sweat while instinctively supporting his arm, afraid he might collapse at any moment. The affectionate maiden, now completely captivated by Kyle Lincoln's unwavering focus on healing, seemed to have forgotten William White standing behind her, watching. Seeing this, William White was fuming with rage, nearly choking on his own anger. To add fuel to the fire, someone nearby remarked, "William White, your daughter found you an excellent son-in-law. This man is truly a miracle doctor." "Humph, he wishes." William White grumbled, wanting to storm over and separate the two. However, he feared disrupting Kyle Lincoln's treatment, unsure how he'd handle the aftermath if that happened. Meanwhile, Ethan Green stood nearby, his face pale with fury, his eyes glaring daggers at Kyle Lincoln, flames of anger practically erupting from him. After treating the last poisoned diner, Kyle Lincoln was utterly exhausted, his complexion as pale as a sheet of paper. He no longer had the strength to stand. As he attempted to push himself up, his legs gave out, and he fell backward. Instinctively, Bianca White reached out with both arms, catching him directly in her embrace. Soft, comforting, and carrying a pure fragrance that seemed to seep into his very soul. Within a minute, Kyle Lincoln's pale face gained a faint blush. Even he was astonished. Truly a case of nourishing young. At the moment of contact with Bianca White, he felt a dense energy emanating from her fragrant body. Using the 9 needles of the sun god technique, he absorbed it entirely, converting it into a strand of spiritual energy for cultivation. Without this, he wouldn't have recovered his complexion so quickly. Could the energy in Bianca's body have a similar effect to the mystic lunar herb? Quickly, Kyle Lincoln dismissed the thought. In his past life as a master of medical arts, he had never encountered such a phenomenon in any woman. The strange occurrence just now was likely a mere coincidence. "You little rascal, are you planning to stay there forever, taking advantage of her?" William White's grumbling voice broke through. Kyle Lincoln smiled wryly, noticing Bianca White's blushing, makeup-free face. He said, "I'm fine now. Thank you. It's nothing. You can rest a bit longer," Bianca White replied, burying her head even deeper. Was this some kind of subtle hint? Hearing this, Ethan Green clenched his fists tightly, his nails digging into his palms, wishing he could devour Kyle Lincoln alive. Smiling faintly, Kyle Lincoln still stood up, paying no attention to the slight disappointment that flashed through Bianca White's eyes. He looked at William White with a serious expression. "Where did you buy this batch of wine from? Which distributor?" Wine. Weren't they suffering from food poisoning? William White looked confused, thinking to himself, the wine distributor is young Master Arthur Gold, so there shouldn't be any issues, right? Kyle Lincoln pointed to the diners who were unharmed and still watching the commotion. "You can ask them if they drank the wine." Recalling that the saved diners were helped by detoxification through urination, these diners suddenly realized, "William White, so you were selling fake wine." Some even rolled up their sleeves, glaring at William White with hostility, seemingly ready to teach him a lesson. "My father didn't know it was fake wine. We are responsible, but the distributor is the real culprit." Bianca White bravely stood in front of William White, speaking, though her eyes still showed a hint of fear. However, this courage left Kyle Lincoln impressed. He decided to help William White one more time. "Bianca is right. We, like you, are victims as well." Kyle Lincoln retracted his silver needle, smiling at everyone. The miracle doctor is right. We should demand compensation from the distributor. Someone shouted, and the emotions of all the diners were stirred, buzzing with anger and discussion. However, Kyle Lincoln noticed a fleeting trace of fear and hesitation in William White's eyes, something not easily detected. Bianca White didn't notice anything unusual. She only wanted to help her father get through this ordeal quickly and hurriedly said, "Father, contact the distributor immediately. They need to take responsibility for this." Chapter 6. The uninvited guest. William White hesitated, pulling Bianca White aside and quietly murmured, "Bianca, there's no real harm done. Maybe we should just let it go." "How can we just let it go? If Kyle Lincoln hadn't been here, our shop would have been shut down by now." Bianca White frowned, her face full of indignation. "But nothing really happened in the end," William White defended, lowering his head as if he had something difficult to admit. Kyle Lincoln gestured for Bianca White to remain silent, and she obediently closed her mouth. "Uncle William, is it because this distributor has significant influence, and you don't want to get involved with them?" Kyle Lincoln asked calmly. "Hayes." William White sighed, realizing Kyle Lincoln had hit the mark. He no longer concealed the truth and admitted, "This wine came from young Master Arthur Gold." Young Master Arthur Gold. Hearing this name, the diners who had previously been eager to seek compensation immediately shrank back, muttered a few words of thanks, and quickly left. Ethan Green also let out an awkward laugh, but his words were pleasant. "Uncle William, the matter has been resolved, so I'll take my leave now. I'll come visit you again when I have free time." "All right, go ahead with your work. Thank you for today." William White waved his hand, as if all the patients had been cured by Ethan Green himself. Kyle Lincoln didn't dwell on these matters and thoughtfully said, "It seems that the influence of young Master Arthur Gold is truly significant. Just now, those people were so aggressive, but now they've all vanished. Isn't that a good thing? It was quite a troublesome situation, but now they've all left, and I don't have to explain anything." William White breathed a sigh of relief. The thought of having to demand compensation made him nervous. He didn't have the courage for that, but with so many people suffering from alcohol poisoning, he couldn't avoid responsibility. If those people pursued the matter, he'd surely have to pay a large sum, covering the compensation that young Master Arthur Gold should have paid. Unexpectedly, William White seemed resigned to this outcome. Kyle Lincoln couldn't help but laugh and teasingly said, "According to what you're saying, we should be thanking young Master Arthur Gold. Isn't that true? The reputation of young Master Arthur Gold really came in handy. The protection fees we paid weren't wasted after all." William White, feeling relieved about saving a large compensation amount, spoke with a mix of gratitude and relief. Still focused on Kyle Lincoln, Bianca White suddenly expressed concern, "Father, you even pay protection fees? Are they gangsters? That's outrageous." "Shoo, don't talk nonsense. There are no gangsters here. What's that saying again? Taking someone's money to help them avoid trouble." William White realized he had misspoken and quickly clarified. "He's clearly one of them." Bianca White pouted, her small face flushing with anger. However, William White had no intention of pursuing young Master Arthur Gold, so she couldn't do anything about it. "Enough about that. Clean up the mess in the shop first," William White scolded, pointing at the chaotic scene on the floor. "You little brat, if you're not in a hurry, lend a hand too." "Father, you didn't even keep him here, so how can you expect him to help clean up?" Bianca White complained. "I didn't say he'd do it for free. Later, I'll call old Master Alexander Gold and see if this kid can work as a school doctor over there." William White rolled his eyes but softened his tone. "Old Master Alexander Gold will surely accept him. He's the professor of Eastern medicine at Mid-Sea Academy of Healing and also my mentor." Bianca White beamed, her cheeks blushing as she spoke. "Maybe he'll even recommend him to Mid-Sea Grand Hospital No. 1. I'll work hard to intern there too." Her shy and innocent demeanor was truly endearing, and Kyle Lincoln couldn't help but steal a few more glances. Feeling as though her soul had been seen through, Bianca White quickly turned away. Just as she was about to help clean the shop, a few uninvited guests arrived. Business is booming, huh? Not a single table is empty. 7 or 8 thuggish men with eccentric appearances swaggered in. The one leading them, with striking red-dyed hair, glanced around before sneering, "But William White, making money like this, you can't let us brothers suffer. The protection fee this month was too low. Boss Rowan Red, you must have forgotten. I've always paid according to the rules, not a penny short." William White approached Rowan Red submissively, his back nearly bent to the ground. "That was last month. Starting this month, your protection fee has to increase," Rowan Red sneered coldly, his eyes sweeping over the floor littered with empty liquor bottles. "Serving your customers such cheap booze, is that okay? I'll have the brothers bring over a few dozen crates of Mao Tai for you." Chapter 7, Dead End, Red. "Boss Rowan Red, this is just small business, no need to use such fine liquor," William White smiled, but tears were almost falling from his eyes. Rowan Red spat on the ground, his face turning fierce as he cursed, "Don't be ungrateful. Giving you the lowest wholesale price is just to let you earn a bit more. Besides, I'm doing this out of respect for Bianca, your little sister." William White quickly stepped in front of Rowan Red, smiling obsequiously, "Boss Rowan Red, you're absolutely right. I'll take a case of Mao Tai to try selling." "Damn it, are you still trying to bargain with me?" Rowan Red shoved William White aside, glaring at him. Moments later, his tone softened, "Why make things hard for yourself? Let Bianca be my mistress, and I wouldn't even charge you for this stock." A sudden laugh broke the tense atmosphere. Kyle Lincoln, who had been silent all along, suddenly chuckled, lazily eyeing the furious Rowan Red. He joked, "Mr. William, with that rooster comb hairstyle of his, what makes him think he can pursue Bianca? Does he know how to crow?" Rowan Red's face immediately darkened, his thick eyebrows knitting together, making him look even more menacing. "Who's this brat daring to mock Boss Rowan Red?" Before Rowan Red could respond, one of his lackeys stepped forward, holding a switchblade in his hand, flicking it open and closed arrogantly. "Oh no, Boss Rowan Red, please don't get angry. I'll discipline this kid right away." William White was on the verge of tears, frantically pleading. He tried to warn Kyle Lincoln, but Kyle spoke up first, "You're ridiculous. Why would I ignore a beautiful girl like Bianca and instead be interested in you?" Bianca White's pale, delicate face instantly flushed red with embarrassment. "You bastard, this kid deserves a beating. Brothers, get him." Rowan Red's fury erupted. As a local kingpin, if he allowed himself to be mocked without retaliation, he would lose all face. Seeing Rowan Red and his men about to charge, Kyle Lincoln pushed William White aside and said, "Mr. William, take care of Bianca." The moment he finished speaking, Kyle Lincoln lunged forward. Rowan Red didn't expect him to move so swiftly and swung his fists wildly. Kyle Lincoln's movements were light and agile, dodging every punch with ease. Then, seemingly without effort, he delivered a kick. The kick appeared gentle, as though it lacked any force. Strangely, Rowan Red couldn't avoid it and could only watch as the kick landed on his stomach. A powerful force followed. "Ah!" With a loud cry, Rowan Red was sent flying 3 meters away, landing heavily on the ground. Everyone was stunned. What kind of immense force would it take to kick someone into the air like that? Kyle Lincoln stood calmly in place, as if he had just done something completely ordinary. However, deep down, he felt a bit frustrated, this body was truly too weak. He had exerted all his strength, yet the destructive power he could unleash was only this much. If given the chance, he needed to go out and see if there were any spiritual herbs or miraculous plants around. For cultivators, spiritual herbs and miraculous plants held a status equivalent to that of wealth in the hearts of ordinary people. Having such plants meant being able to refine high-grade elixirs, which were immensely beneficial for advancing cultivation with no downsides. The only question was how many naturally occurring spiritual herbs and miraculous plants still existed in this era. "You brat! You even dare to hit me? Do you know who my boss is?" Rowan Red struggled to get up, clutching his stomach, his face twisted in pain. This voice snapped Kyle Lincoln out of his thoughts. He sneered and asked curiously, "Baby red, grenade red, or dirty red? Damn it, you must have a death wish." Rowan Red laughed angrily, his gaze shifting to William White and Bianca White. Letting out a cold snort, he said darkly, "William White, if you don't seek trouble, trouble won't find you. Hiring this idiot to guard your place, what a foolish decision. Just wait until young Master Arthur Gold returns from the capital. Let's see how he deals with you. Brothers, let's go." With that, Rowan Red slung his arm over the shoulder of the lackey beside him and walked out step by step. William White was momentarily dumbfounded. Young Master Arthur Gold was a figure who wielded great influence in this region. If he truly decided to confront a small-time commoner like William, then William would have no way out. Chapter 8, A Mysterious Background. "Young man, perhaps you could say a word to Rowan Red on my behalf." William White looked extremely uneasy. He turned awkwardly to Kyle Lincoln, but the next second, his voice suddenly stopped. Slowly, he uttered two words, "I'm sorry." But Kyle Lincoln was nowhere to be seen. "Father, Kyle Lincoln is over there." Bianca White suddenly pointed in a direction, her face filled with astonishment. At some point, Kyle Lincoln had dashed outside, catching up to Rowan Red and appearing at the front entrance. To Rowan Red, Kyle Lincoln now resembled a grim reaper. His entire being exuded a chilling, menacing aura that was indescribably terrifying. Suppressing the fear rising within him, Rowan Red mustered all his courage and asked, "What do you want?" "Just now, you said something I really liked." Kyle Lincoln's smile was dark and eerie, as if enveloped by an impenetrable layer of gloom. "It's called, 'If you don't seek death, you won't die.'" The same phrase, when uttered by Kyle Lincoln, sent chills down people's spines. Rowan Red's eyes widened in terror, and he quickly stepped back a few paces. You dare hit me? Try it. Want a beating? No problem." Kyle Lincoln flexed his wrists and sneered. "This is the first time I've heard such a shameless request." Pfft. Bianca White couldn't hold back and burst into laughter, only to hurriedly cover her mouth. Because Kyle Lincoln's fist had indeed landed squarely on Rowan Red's face. Blood spurted from his nose, his eyes swelled like a panda's, and a large lump formed on his face. In an instant, Rowan Red's demeanor transformed completely. Gone was any trace of his thug-like arrogance. He now looked like a punching bag, inviting anyone to take a swing. Clapping his hands, Kyle Lincoln finally stopped his flurry of punches. "You all can get lost now." At his command, Rowan Red and his gang scrambled out of the restaurant in a panic. After running about 10 meters, they suddenly heard Kyle Lincoln's voice again, "Wait, Rowan Red." Like a kite being reeled back in, Rowan Red and his group obediently froze in place. If Kyle told them to go east, they wouldn't dare head west. Kyle Lincoln's voice turned icy, "The day young Master Arthur Gold returns, tell him to come see me directly. If any of you dare harm Uncle William or Bianca, I have 1,000 ways to make your lives worse than death." In the 25th century, Kyle Lincoln's cultivation was profound, his strength unparalleled. He had always been the one bullying others, never tolerating the slightest grievance. So when faced with Rowan Red's arrogance, Kyle Lincoln struck without hesitation, beating him to a pulp to vent his anger. Just recalling the beating made Rowan Red shudder. Forcing a stiff smile, he stammered, "I understand. Now get lost." A minute later, the restaurant finally returned to peace. Bianca White, seemingly unfazed, ran up to Kyle Lincoln, squeezing his biceps and tapping his chest with a look of amazement. "You're incredible. It's the first time I've seen someone fight like that. Have you trained in martial arts? Martial arts? A trace of self-mockery flickered in Kyle Lincoln's heart. In the past, whenever he acted, the results were earth-shattering. Now, he could only display a few martial arts moves to deal with a bunch of street thugs. Well, cultivation can always be started anew, but a life is only given once. Being able to avoid the heavenly tribulation and reincarnate back to the 21st century is already a great fortune. Instead of complaining, why not live this life to the fullest? Did you figure it out? It's really hard to keep one's strength hidden these days. In an instant, Kyle Lincoln cast aside his heavy thoughts and flashed a carefree smile. Bianca White couldn't help but laugh at his remark, her delicate face blooming like a flower, leaving others momentarily dazed. You brat, stay away from my daughter, or don't even think about staying here. William White, seeing Kyle Lincoln and Bianca White chatting and laughing, grew furious. He only had one daughter and couldn't allow some boy with an unclear background to take an interest in her. Bianca White was long accustomed to William White's grumpy personality and paid him no mind. The next moment, she suddenly reacted and looked at William White with surprised delight. Dad, does that mean you've decided to let him stay? What choice do I have? William White glared, now putting on a stern demeanor. If Rowan Red comes looking for this brat and doesn't find him, he'll surely vent his anger on me. I'm not that foolish. Chapter 9, Stepping onto the path of cultivation. Kyle Lincoln smiled and teased William White. Uncle William, aren't you worried I might run away? You wouldn't dare. William White hadn't expected Kyle Lincoln to be so quick-witted, and his face darkened immediately. Kyle Lincoln and Bianca White exchanged amused glances, saying nothing, as words were unnecessary. There's a small bed in the storage room, you can stay there. William White, realizing Kyle Lincoln was deliberately teasing him, snorted coldly and pointed to a small door to the north. Big brother Kyle, I'll go get you some bedding. Bianca White quickly offered and darted off, as though afraid William White might change his mind. Watching Bianca White's graceful figure disappear, a faint smile appeared on Kyle Lincoln's face. This girl was meticulous and kind-hearted, a natural talent for becoming a doctor. If given the chance, he'd definitely teach her a few tricks. When they reached the storage room William White mentioned, Bianca White arrived with a brand new set of bedding. The two divided the tasks, one cleaned while the other made the bed. Before long, the small storage room was tidied up. Dusting off her hands and looking at the modest room with a hint of awkwardness, Bianca White smiled and said, "It's not much, but it'll do for now." "It's not bad at all," Kyle Lincoln said, not having high expectations for accommodations. In his previous life, he'd even stayed in mountain caves to harvest spiritual herbs from snowy peaks. Though he didn't complain, Kyle Lincoln wasn't entirely satisfied with the place either. Currently, his cultivation was almost non-existent. To start training again, he would need spiritual energy, which originates from a source called spiritual essence, the fundamental essence of all things nurtured by heaven and earth. To put it simply, imagine a piece of extremely fertile land where anything can grow without artificial fertilizers. Such land might contain a spiritual essence. However, in this city, factories were everywhere, and many spiritual essences had been destroyed by human activities. The spiritual energy was so thin it was pitiful, making it unsuitable for cultivation. Kyle Lincoln was helpless, his body was only slightly stronger than an average person. He relied on food to survive, so he needed to find shelter first, then gradually search for spiritual essence, slowly improving his cultivation. "Bianca, this bedsheet, could it be yours?" Pulling himself out of his thoughts, Kyle Lincoln's gaze fell on the bedsheet. Only then did he notice it was light pink and decorated with cartoon characters. Bianca White froze for a moment. Her small face turned adorably red as she pouted and said, "Why? Are you saying you don't like me? You're so beautiful, how could I not like you?" Kyle Lincoln found her reaction amusing and couldn't help but ask back. "Humph, as long as you know," Bianca White finally nodded in satisfaction. "All right, rest here. I'll go outside and help my father tidy up a bit." Left alone in the storage room, Kyle Lincoln, feeling energetic, sat on the bed and began cultivating according to the 9 needles of the Sun God technique. The 9 needles of the Sun God technique consists of 7 levels, each further divided into 3 stages, early, mid, and peak. Reaching the peak of the 3rd stage could lead to a successful foundation establishment, marking the beginning of the path of cultivation. The cultivation path is vast and endless, divided into 7 major levels: foundation establishment, golden core, nascent soul, great ascension, void return, true essence, and tribulation transformation. After achieving foundation establishment, one could break their virginity and engage in intimate relations with women. In modern terms, it means sex. The first step was to sense the presence of spiritual energy. Kyle Lincoln held his breath, calmed his mind, and sat cross-legged. He opened all his acupoints, striving to sense a trace of spiritual energy, draw it into his body, and then, through the process of inhaling and exhaling, harmonize it. Using the spiritual energy, he cleansed and nourished his meridians, eventually converting it into a pure strand of spiritual power stored in his spiritual reservoir. The spiritual reservoir, also known as the dantian, is where spiritual power is stored. Focusing all his energy on a single point, Kyle Lincoln transcended the material world, seemingly merging with the entire space around him. Spiritual energy. What surprised Kyle Lincoln was that it didn't take long for him to sense a pure strand of spiritual energy. Though it was just a single strand, it was incredibly pure, unlike the diluted, impure spiritual energy found in the outside world, which could harm the body rather than benefit it. Chapter 10, Using wine to nourish the grass. Hurriedly absorbing the strand of spiritual energy into his body, in an instant, it flowed through each meridian like a stream of water, merging with the yang energy and transforming into a dense spiritual force. Finally, it broke through the barrier between flesh and blood, advancing Kyle Lincoln to the mid-stage of the first level of 9 needles of the Sun God. Reaching the first level realm would strengthen the flesh and blood of the body, enhancing Kyle Lincoln's physique significantly. However, to fully control the spiritual force at will, long-term cultivation would still be required. Exhaling a breath of turbid air, Kyle Lincoln seemed to transform into a different person. While his appearance remained unchanged, his aura underwent a profound transformation. At this moment, Kyle Lincoln appeared extraordinary, exuding an indescribable heroic spirit. Even dressed in cheap clothing, he radiated an undeniable brilliance. Yet, Kyle Lincoln had no time to focus on his transformation. More important to him was the origin of that strand of spiritual energy. If he could trace the source of this energy and find a spiritual origin, it would be a life-saving treasure for him, like coal in the winter. Inside the warehouse filled with wine barrels, which felt cramped and dusty, Kyle Lincoln paid no mind to the dirt on the barrels and began moving them one by one. Wine blossom herb. A few minutes later, a startled cry escaped from Kyle Lincoln amidst the messy stacks of wine barrels. He had discovered a wine blossom herb growing in the crevice between the barrels and the wall. Though its growth was ordinary, it was perfectly intact, and a faint strand of spiritual energy originated from this very herb. As its name suggests, the wine blossom herb emitted a strong wine fragrance. In Kyle Lincoln's era, it was only used for brewing wine because it contained very little spiritual energy. However, in this situation, the wine blossom herb became a treasure for Kyle Lincoln. If he could cultivate it successfully, it could produce wine blossom flowers. Spiritual herbs, like cultivation levels, were strictly classified into 9 grades, with the first grade being the lowest and the 9th grade the highest. The wine blossom herb was a low-grade spiritual herb, not even considered a proper first-grade herb. However, the wine blossom flower was a genuine first-grade spiritual herb, containing far more spiritual energy than the herb itself. Glancing to the side, Kyle Lincoln couldn't help but chuckle. No wonder a wine blossom herb could grow here. It turned out that in the warehouse, there were 2 large barrels of maiden's blush. For some reason, one of the barrels had a small crack, causing wine to drip into the crevice over the years. The method to cultivate wine blossom herb was precisely to nourish it with maiden's blush. This coincidence had allowed the miraculous wine blossom herb, which was supposed to be cultivated in the 25th century, to appear 4 centuries earlier. Even the heavens are helping me. With this, I should be able to break through to the peak of the first level within 2 months, perhaps even sooner, Kyle Lincoln thought to himself. Arranging the other barrels of wine neatly, leaving only one intact barrel of maiden's blush, Kyle Lincoln, of course, wasn't planning to drink it. He intended to continue nurturing the wine blossom herb, hoping to cultivate a higher-tier wine blossom flower as soon as possible. Opening a jar of maiden's blush, Kyle Lincoln poured the wine generously over the wine blossom herb without hesitation. Bang! As he was happily watering, the door to the room was suddenly slammed open. Kyle Lincoln looked up, just in time to see the furious face of William White. He couldn't help but offer a wry smile. "Uncle William, I can explain." "Explain." William White stormed into the storage room, rubbed his eyes several times to confirm, and saw that the wine Kyle Lincoln was pouring out was indeed the long-preserved maiden's blush. His entire body trembled with rage, his face flushed red as he pointed at Kyle Lincoln's nose and scolded, "What explanation could you possibly give? Don't tell me this plant is some miraculous remedy or something. Even if it is, you can't just use wine to water it. Are you out of your mind?" Kyle Lincoln was momentarily stunned. Suddenly, he didn't know how to explain. He couldn't possibly tell William White, "Congratulations, uncle, you guessed right. This is indeed a miraculous herb." If he did, William White probably wouldn't stop at just scolding him but might even consider killing him on the spot. The two stood staring at each other, and for a moment, the atmosphere became somewhat awkward. "You brat, first take those barrels of wine outside, we have customers coming." William White was the first to break the silence, pointing at the barrels of beer behind Kyle Lincoln with a displeased expression as he gave his orders. "Got it." Knowing he was in the wrong, Kyle Lincoln could only put aside his task of nurturing the plant and help William White handle the tavern's business. #### Chapter 11, the upgraded beer version. William White saw that he was still obedient, intentionally making things a bit difficult for him. Pointing at 4 crates of beer, he said, "You have half a minute to carry these 4 crates outside. If you delay the customers' drinking, it'll cause trouble." Kyle Lincoln smiled, unbothered, squatted down, and without appearing to exert any effort, lifted all 4 crates of beer at once. For an average person, carrying 2 crates at the same time would already be considered strong. Yet Kyle Lincoln managed 4 crates, and he did so effortlessly, walking briskly out of the storage room. William White's mouth fell open in shock. Having spent his entire life working in restaurants and enduring plenty of hard labor in his youth, he had never encountered anyone as strong as Kyle Lincoln. More importantly, strength is typically proportional to physique, but Kyle Lincoln didn't even look muscular. How could he unleash such terrifying power? Recalling Kyle Lincoln's agility when dealing with Rowan Red, William White couldn't help but fall into deep thought. By the time he also exited the storage room, his attitude toward Kyle Lincoln had improved slightly. "Kid, thank you." "Ah. No need to be so polite." Kyle Lincoln was slightly taken aback. How could William White's demeanor change so quickly in the blink of an eye? William White rubbed his hands together, his face showing a hint of excitement. He chuckled and said, "Kid, you wasted so much of my maiden's blush, but I won't hold it against you. However, I do have a small request." "Let me see." Kyle Lincoln had no idea what he was up to. Feeling both amused and helpless, he said, "Uncle William, just say what you want directly. I've already asked Bianca to help you with your work arrangements. For the next few days, you can stay here. But when you're free, help me out with some errands as a way to pay for your lodging." How does that sound? William White no longer hesitated and laid it out plainly. Kyle Lincoln suddenly understood. So Uncle William had his eyes on his strength. For someone so calculating, his daughter, Bianca White, was sharp and adorable. This family was truly intriguing. Kyle Lincoln chuckled inwardly but cheerfully agreed on the surface, that's the least I can do. It's just, about the maiden's blush. I already told you, didn't I? Don't argue with me, Uncle William waved his hand, appearing generous. You misunderstood, Uncle. What I mean is that the amount of maiden's blush might not be enough. Kyle Lincoln knew his words might come across as offensive, but to quickly cultivate the inebriating blossom, he had no choice but to shamelessly ask, could I trouble you to get a bit more? William White's face instantly darkened. He looked at Kyle Lincoln as if he were some kind of monster. You want maiden's blush just to water plants? Kyle Lincoln nodded. You. William White was so furious he almost spat blood. After a moment, he finally calmed himself down and spoke irritably, fine. But you have to work harder. If you can't manage, don't bother with the job Bianca found for you. Help me handle the business here first. Kyle Lincoln smiled. He didn't care much about work. After all, what he needed wasn't money but time to cultivate and strive to break through the first peak as soon as possible. William White, where's our wine? It's still not here. Suddenly, an impatient voice echoed from the main hall. Coming right up. William White responded and unceremoniously ordered Kyle Lincoln, hurry up and bring the wine to the guests. Kyle Lincoln picked up a keg of beer and strode into the main hall, taking on the role of a server. He helped the guests open each bottle of beer, but then his brows furrowed. Picking up a bottle, he sniffed it. The scent of hops hit his nose, pungent, bitter, and overwhelmingly harsh. This is supposed to be wine. Kyle Lincoln disdainfully put the beer bottle down, his expression full of contempt. The guests were stunned. Someone else picked up a bottle, sniffed it, and then laughed heartily, kid, that's how beer is supposed to smell. You're too young to understand, so stop talking nonsense. Kyle Lincoln curiously asked, does all beer have this flavor? Different brands have slightly different tastes, but they're generally the same. Kyle Lincoln didn't argue further. He quietly pondered. In the 25th century, although winemaking techniques had been refined across various levels, improvements were mostly limited to red, white, and yellow wines, leaving beer largely untouched. However, this particular beer was indeed different from anything he'd tasted before. Chapter 12, passing the interview round, what are you mumbling about over there? Get back to work. William White, hearing the commotion in the main hall, feared Kyle Lincoln might ruin his business. He quickly whispered, trying to reason with him, don't you still have to take care of your weeds? Why are you still hanging around here? William White's words suddenly made Kyle Lincoln realize something. The reason why this type of wine is different from anything I've ever tasted lies fundamentally in the inebriating blossom. Uncle William, I can help you brew better beer, do you believe me? Leaving this statement behind, Kyle Lincoln immediately returned to the warehouse, leaving William White and the guests dumbfounded. The inebriating blossom only grows into one plant, and each plant has 5 branches. Although feeling a bit regretful, Kyle Lincoln thought William White wasn't a bad person, and since he was Bianca White's father, he decided to help him more. Carefully plucking one branch of the inebriating blossom, Kyle Lincoln took a small bottle, placed the branch inside, and ran to the kitchen, hanging the bottle over the fire to gently heat it. A few minutes later, the branch of the inebriating blossom melted, turning into half a bottle of light green liquid, crystal clear, resembling a piece of jade. As Kyle Lincoln stepped out of the kitchen, he happened to see a radiant and beautiful figure looking around, seemingly searching for someone. Bianca, your father is probably in the main hall, Kyle Lincoln smiled and reminded her. Who cares about him? I'm looking for you. Bianca White's eyes lit up as she stared at Kyle Lincoln and said, you seem you seem even more handsome than before. Really? Kyle Lincoln chuckled. Having reached the mid-stage of the 9 needles of the sun god's first level, his vitality and spirit were greatly enhanced, which in Bianca White's eyes translated to him looking more attractive. I've already spoken with Mr. Gold. Tomorrow, I'll take you to the school for an interview. However, Mr. Gold is currently on a business trip, so he can only provide a recommendation for you, the rest will be up to you. Speaking of this, Bianca White lowered her head, appearing somewhat apologetic. Kyle Lincoln didn't expect this girl to care so much about his affairs. Feeling touched, he smiled and said, with my skills, do you think I can't pass an interview? Bianca White giggled mischievously, winking as she said, if you succeed in the interview, you'll have to treat me to something nice. After speaking, Bianca White started calculating what she wanted Kyle Lincoln to treat her to. Seeing her serious demeanor, Kyle Lincoln stared at her in a daze. This girl was both innocent and a bit wild, so much better than the elegant but pragmatic women he had encountered before. By the way, what are you holding? Bianca White's question immediately snapped Kyle Lincoln out of his thoughts. Holding up the inebriating blossom liquid, he smiled mysteriously, this is a treasure. Come, I'll show you. Leading Bianca White back to the main hall, they saw the diners happily toasting and drinking. William White was sitting at the cash register, beaming with joy, likely having earned a good amount from the wine sales. Kyle Lincoln smiled as he approached and said to William White, Uncle William, I've brought the beer brewing formula. Let's try it now, shall we? Is this all you have? William White glanced up briefly, then showed a disdainful expression, impatiently pointing behind him, go back to where you came from. Stop causing trouble. Beer is not a cocktail, how can it be mixed to create a different taste? Even if you add some fruit juice or whatever, wouldn't it ruin the beer's flavor? William White has been running a restaurant for many years, so he knows a thing or two about alcohol. Dad, just let Kyle try once. At most, it'll only cost you 1 bottle of beer, Bianca White said, dissatisfied with William White's attitude, standing in front of Kyle Lincoln to defend him. William White threw the account book onto the table, glaring as he said, Bianca, why are you always siding with this brat? Let me tell you, don't get too close to him. Be careful, he might have bad intentions toward you. Dad! Can you be serious for once? Bianca White blushed, reaching out to pinch William White's arm hard. Ouch! William White cried out in pain, glaring fiercely at Kyle Lincoln before impatiently waving his hand. The beer's over there, go try it yourself. But I'm warning you, only open 1 bottle. Kyle Lincoln smiled and led Bianca White toward the beer bottles. Before mixing, Bianca White whispered quietly to Kyle Lincoln, that's just how my dad is. Don't take his words to heart, okay? Chapter 13, The price must be absolutely reasonable, but I already took it to heart, Kyle Lincoln said, deliberately putting on a serious face. Bianca White was stunned. Kyle Lincoln smirked mischievously and said, because I really do have intentions toward you. You're so annoying. Bianca White blushed, turning her head away without saying another word. Did she really not realize how captivating she was when she acted like that? Kyle Lincoln chuckled at himself, thinking that the label of premature guy still hadn't been shaken off. Yet, he couldn't help but tease whenever he was near a beautiful woman. Alright then, let's mix the beer first. Taking a deep breath, Kyle Lincoln opened a bottle of beer, tilted the small vial in his hand, and poured out just a single drop of herbal liquor essence. With a crisp pop, the essence instantly dissolved into the beer, causing a dramatic transformation. A rich, indescribable aroma of liquor wafted out from the narrow bottle neck. Within less than half a minute, the entire hall was filled with this intoxicating scent, even overpowering the aroma of the food. It smells amazing. Bianca White, being the closest, was the first to react, looking at Kyle Lincoln in astonishment. More accurately, she was staring at the bottle of beer. Kyle Lincoln shook the bottle lightly and grinned. I told you, I'm great at mixing drinks. Fine, you're great, whatever, Bianca White joked, then turned to William White. Dad, did you smell that? This scent is from the beer Kyle mixed. William White, who had been looking around for the source of the aroma, froze upon hearing Bianca's words. He glared at Kyle Lincoln for a moment before finally speaking. You brat, you've got some skill. Now hand it over, let me try it. Taking the freshly mixed bottle of beer, William White only needed a whiff to feel invigorated and refreshed, an indescribable sensation. Excellent beer. After taking a few large gulps, William White still wasn't satisfied. Reflecting for a moment, he could only utter 2 words. Bianca White was astonished as she looked at her father. She knew her father was very knowledgeable about wine, and it was rare for any wine to satisfy him this much. Thinking of this, Bianca White became even more amazed by Kyle Lincoln and couldn't help but ask, you know medicine, and you know how to mix drinks. I really want to know what else you're good at. Without thinking, Kyle Lincoln instinctively replied, I'm even better at flirting. Huh. Bianca White was stunned, her small face blushing like a ripe peach, so luscious it seemed as if it could drip juice. Fortunately, Kyle Lincoln's voice wasn't loud, otherwise, with just those few words, the favorable impression William White had just formed thanks to the new beer would have crumbled instantly. Bianca White secretly reached out and pinched Kyle Lincoln, her large, sparkling eyes glimmering with a shy yet captivating charm. Kyle Lincoln only felt as if his waist was being gently massaged, an indescribable sense of comfort washing over him. William White, what are you drinking? Let me have a taste. The other diners also put down their beers, staring intently at the bottle in William White's hand as if their stomachs were growling with hunger. Unfortunately, the bottle was already empty, drained completely by William White. William White stood up, his face beaming. Don't worry, everyone. I'll get some for you right away. With that, William White grabbed Kyle Lincoln's arm and whispered slyly, Kid, how did you make this drink? It's called Fragrant Blossoms Water, a secret liquor blend. Just 1 drop into beer can transform it into what you just had. Kyle Lincoln handed over the Fragrant Blossoms Water, but before he could finish explaining, William White had snatched the bottle, his eyes gleaming with greed. Without listening to another word, he quickly grabbed several bottles of beer and dashed off. When he returned, the aroma of the liquor filled the room. The diners, enchanted by the scent, looked as though they could hardly wait to dive in and quench their thirst. William White laid out the bottles, a cunning smile on his face. These are premium drinks from my personal stash. You can't find these outside. I'm not asking for much, just 100 per bottle. Quite reasonable, isn't it? 100. Everyone gasped in shock. Kyle Lincoln felt even more uneasy. Although inebriating blossom was rare, it wouldn't be long before he could cultivate it in abundance. Just a single drop of extract, how could it be worth so much? Your father is too greedy, Kyle Lincoln muttered helplessly, rubbing his nose as he spoke quietly to Bianca White beside him. Hashtag chapter 14, don't grab there. Bianca White lowered her head, her cheeks flushed red all the way to her ears, wishing she could find a hole to crawl into. Especially when she saw the diners pulling out their wallets to pay, Bianca White felt even more embarrassed. Several times, she wanted to persuade her father otherwise, but Kyle Lincoln stopped her each time. Rarity adds value. From that perspective, your father isn't entirely wrong, Kyle Lincoln said with a smile, sharing his thoughts. If these people are willing to spend money on the drink, it means they aren't short on cash. Why save money for them? Fair enough, Bianca White replied, sticking out her tongue playfully, looking adorably mischievous. The diners not only praised this delicious beer but also enjoyed their meals more, with each table ordering at least 3 additional dishes. In the blink of an eye, the restaurant's revenue had doubled. When the restaurant closed, William White couldn't contain his excitement. While flipping through the accounts, he chuckled gleefully, occasionally muttering, "The god of wealth has blessed us," which made Kyle Lincoln and Bianca White laugh even harder. In high spirits, William White planned to have a small drink, but the new beer had sold out completely. He muttered to himself, "All the beer is gone. These drinkers didn't even leave me a bottle." However, there was still plenty of fragrant blossoms water left. William White could drink as much of it as he wanted. William White opened a bottle of beer, carefully poured in a single drop, then paused and muttered, "I'm drinking this myself, why should I be so stingy?" After saying that, he added 4 more drops. "Hey, don't drink that." At that moment, Kyle Lincoln, who was helping Bianca White clean up the dishes, caught sight of William White's actions out of the corner of his eye and was startled. Unfortunately, Kyle Lincoln's warning came too late. After just a few sips of beer, William White felt the world spinning, as if he were floating on clouds. The moment he set the bottle down, he collapsed to the floor with a thud. Bianca White screamed in fear and rushed to her father's side, calling out to him repeatedly. "Mr. Kyle, is my father going to be okay?" Bianca White looked up at Kyle Lincoln, her face full of worry. "He's just drunk from adding 5 drops of the fragrant blossoms water. A good sleep will fix him," Kyle Lincoln replied, both amused and exasperated as he looked at William White. Helping him up, Kyle added, "Good thing he didn't pour in the entire bottle, or he might have been drunk to death and never woken up." "That's so exaggerated," Bianca White exclaimed, her mouth agape in shock. She picked up the bottle of fragrant blossoms water, held it under her delicate nose, and took a couple of light sniffs. A captivating aroma filled her senses, making her let out a soft, involuntary moan. At the same time, an overwhelming drowsiness washed over her. Seeing Bianca White staggering and about to fall, Kyle Lincoln quickly supported William White and moved just in time to catch Bianca as she collapsed into his arms. Kyle Lincoln could only feel a wave of helplessness, his head filled with black lines as he smiled wryly. One person knocked out by drinking it, another by merely smelling it. What kind of situation is this? With no other choice, Kyle Lincoln carried both of them to their rooms. As he laid Bianca White on the bed, she instinctively reached out and wrapped her arms around his neck. "So hot," she murmured in a seductive voice, which instantly made Kyle Lincoln feel a rush of heat. It was as if a stream of liquid was about to break through his nose and flow out. Nosebleed. When Kyle Lincoln noticed, a drop of blood had already fallen onto the bedsheet, quickly spreading into a circle as large as a coin. "Oh no!" Kyle Lincoln was startled, hurriedly grabbing some tissues to stop the bleeding while frantically trying to clean the bedsheet. However, the fabric absorbed the blood too well, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't completely remove the stain. Feeling helpless, Kyle Lincoln shrugged and gave up. The nosebleed was due to Kyle Lincoln practicing the 9 needles of the sun god technique. The excessive yang energy in his body was overwhelming, and since he hadn't yet mastered control over it, any slight stimulation would cause the energy to become chaotic, manifesting as a nosebleed. "So hot," Bianca White's voice rang out, soft and teasing, like a feather brushing against Kyle Lincoln's heart. It made every inch of his skin, even every pore, feel as if they were burning, igniting an uncontrollable fire within him. Kyle Lincoln tried his best to suppress the rising urge, but Bianca White was far from calm. Her small hands waved aimlessly in the air, and once they grabbed hold of Kyle Lincoln, they wouldn't let go. "Don't grab there." In his panic to dodge, Kyle Lincoln suddenly froze. Chapter 15. Beyond reach. Bianca White's right hand had accidentally grabbed his little brother, and to make matters worse, after gripping it, she smacked her lips in satisfaction as if she had just won a contest. She no longer complained about the heat. Kyle Lincoln nearly burst into tears. His mental fortitude wasn't strong enough yet, and facing such temptation, it was incredibly difficult to suppress the chaotic yang energy within him. What seemed like a minor impulse could, in fact, harm his cultivation progress. "Bianca, let go for now. Brother Kyle will get you a glass of water, okay? Kyle Lincoln softened his tone, coaxing her as if she were a child. In reality, Bianca White was indeed like a child. She pouted in dissatisfaction and shook her head, her grip tightening in her half-dazed state. Kyle Lincoln could only groan in frustration, torn between exasperation and reluctant enjoyment. How can I, the proud leader of the Order of the Celestial Physicians, be bullied like this by a little girl? Kyle Lincoln, naturally competitive, decided to mentally reframe the situation, imagining Bianca White as his opponent. Muttering to himself, a sudden idea struck him. That's it. I've mastered so many secret TCM techniques, why not use one or two to help her sober up? Perhaps Bianca White's allure was too overwhelming, causing Kyle Lincoln to momentarily forget everything he knew about traditional Chinese medicine. Taking a deep breath, Kyle Lincoln rubbed his hands together to generate warmth. In a gentle voice, he said, "Bianca, I need to lift your shirt a little. Please forgive me." Lifting the pristine white short-sleeved shirt, it revealed a flat, fair abdomen. Placing his hand on it, the sensation from his fingertips was more intoxicating than the finest wine enhanced by aromatic liquor essence. Shaking his head firmly, Kyle Lincoln barely managed to regain his composure. Taking a deep breath, he gently massaged Bianca White's abdomen in a clockwise motion, targeting the divine deficiency in kidneys' gateway acupoints. With each motion, the sacred peaks on Bianca White's chest slightly quivered, causing Kyle Lincoln's mind to wander. He wanted to look away but felt an inexplicable force pulling his gaze back, leaving him unable to resist. There was no other choice, he had to endure. After approximately 40 repetitions, the redness on Bianca White's face gradually faded. Although she had been enchanted by the aromatic liquor, this was indeed her first time being intoxicated. Following the abdominal massage to soothe her liver and relieve stagnation, another round was needed to strengthen her stomach and provide warmth. Kyle Lincoln used just one finger, pausing on the soft abdomen before slowly moving upward, stopping right below her chest. The continuous friction between these two areas achieved results that many medications could not. After a while of massaging, Kyle Lincoln helped Bianca White adjust her clothing. The next step was simply to wait. Gradually, Bianca White's delicate face returned to normal, appearing even more radiant and rosy, like a juicy peach tempting someone to take a bite. "Brother Kyle, did I fall asleep?" "Half asleep," Bianca White instinctively muttered. Kyle Lincoln found it strange, though she was clearly sober, why did she still appear so dazed? Bianca White tilted her head, pondering for a while before smiling and saying, "I only took a sniff, yet I got drunk." "Brother Kyle, that wine is truly potent." "Who could disagree?" Kyle Lincoln responded with a wry smile. "I'm sorry." Bianca White lowered her head. Spotting a red mark on the bedsheet, she stared at it in confusion. Suddenly realizing something, her face turned beet red, burning as if it were on fire. "What did you do to me?" When Bianca White raised her head, her tone immediately became much sterner, glaring directly at Kyle Lincoln. #### Chapter 16, Pure Spiritual Power. "I was just helping you sober up," Kyle Lincoln said blankly. Then, noticing Bianca White's gaze, he suddenly understood and broke out in a cold sweat. "You've misunderstood a bit." At this moment, Kyle Lincoln felt more wronged than Doe. "Then tell me, what exactly have I misunderstood?" If her clothes weren't still intact and her body didn't feel any different, Bianca White would have had a hard time staying calm. Kyle Lincoln blushed and helplessly explained, That's my nosebleed." Time seemed to pause for a second. "Really?" Bianca White asked, half doubting. "Of course, it's true." Kyle Lincoln, feeling exasperated, blurted out, "If it were really your virgin blood, how could there be just a tiny bit? Think about it yourself." Bianca White thought carefully for a moment, her embarrassment deepening. She raised her small fist and rained punches down on Kyle Lincoln, pouting, "You're so annoying." How could you even say something like that? Kyle Lincoln remained silent. If I didn't explain, after just one day of being reborn, I'd already be misunderstood by someone. That would be too unbearable. By the way, where's my father? Bianca White, sensing the awkward atmosphere, quickly changed the subject. Kyle Lincoln smiled and teased, Uncle William drank too much. He probably needs a good sleep. I'll go make him some hangover soup. When he wakes up tomorrow morning and drinks it, he won't have a headache. Thank you, you're so kind. Bianca White smiled bitterly and lowered her head. My father always takes advantage of you, yet you never hold it against him. Uncle William is just a bit greedy. That's not a big fault, nothing worth holding a grudge over. Bianca White nodded, seemingly lost in thought. Her gaze drifted far away as she softly said, if it weren't for me, he wouldn't be so money-hungry. In truth, it's all because of me. Kyle Lincoln frowned slightly and gently asked, do you want to tell me about it? Raising a college student isn't easy. Most of the money my father worked so hard to earn had to be spent on me, Bianca White explained briefly, her eyes glimmering with emotion. Kyle Lincoln knew there was likely more to the story but didn't press further. Instead, he spoke in a relaxed tone to comfort her, with the fragrant wine elixir I gave him, his business will surely improve. Bianca White nodded earnestly, her small face lighting up with a radiant smile. Suddenly, her expression tensed, and she anxiously asked, do you think Rowan Red might send young Master Arthur Gold to cause trouble? Kyle Lincoln's brows immediately furrowed tightly, and an invisible aura of authority began to gather. Later, Kyle Lincoln regained his relaxed demeanor, don't worry, as long as I'm here, whether it's young Master Arthur Gold or young Master Silver, I won't show them any respect. Hee, you're the best. Bianca White playfully stuck out her tongue and leaned against the headboard, chatting with Kyle Lincoln about all sorts of random topics. Their laughter occasionally filled the room, creating an atmosphere of joy. When Bianca White started feeling sleepy again, Kyle Lincoln left her room, prepared a bowl of hangover soup for William White, and then returned to the storage room. Sitting cross-legged on his bed, he began cultivating. Perhaps it was during Bianca White's drunken state that Kyle Lincoln managed to resist various temptations. Although there wasn't much progress with the 9 needles of the sun god technique, his spiritual consciousness had noticeably improved. For members of the Order of the Celestial Physicians, spiritual consciousness was sometimes even more important than cultivation levels. Whether it was alchemy, medicine-making, talisman crafting, or acupuncture, all required a strong spiritual consciousness. The night passed without Kyle Lincoln resting, yet he didn't feel tired. On the contrary, he felt refreshed. This was the benefit of having a powerful spiritual consciousness. Not only that, but his meridians were also significantly stronger than the previous day. They were no longer hollow but carried a trace of pure spiritual energy flowing through them. This was clearly a good sign. After washing up, William White emerged from his bedroom, stretching luxuriously and looking extremely relaxed. But the moment he saw Kyle Lincoln, a shadow of annoyance crossed William White's face. Kid, why didn't you warn me that the fragrant wine elixir shouldn't be consumed in excess? Who told you to be so greedy, not even asking before gulping it down? Although only a day had passed, Kyle Lincoln and William White had grown somewhat familiar with each other. Kyle couldn't help but joke, Uncle William, there's still half a bottle of beer left. Want to take a sip? They say a morning drink can really perk you up. Get lost. I'm not falling for your tricks. William White grumbled, deliberately bumping into Kyle Lincoln as he passed. Move aside, I need to use the bathroom. Kyle Lincoln chuckled and stepped aside as William White walked past. Breakfast was prepared by Bianca White. It was simple but heartwarming. After finishing their meal, Bianca White stood up and said, Kyle, I'll take you to the school for your application. Going today already? William White immediately voiced his dissatisfaction. There's still a lot of work to do in the shop. Bianca White glared at William White and reminded him, Dad doesn't even pay Kyle a salary, yet you keep taking advantage of him. Why are you siding with an outsider? William White knew he was being unreasonable and could only mutter this after a long pause. Kyle Lincoln laughed heartily. Before leaving, he took a few stones out of his pocket, placed them on the table, and instructed, these stones can explode. If Rowan Red and his gang come looking for trouble again, just throw these at them. Don't hold back. These were explosive stones Kyle Lincoln had casually crafted the previous night while cultivating to practice controlling his spiritual energy. They weren't complicated to make, just infuse them with spiritual energy and say the word spirit to trigger a small explosion. Explosion? William White looked skeptical, do you think I'm a child? Kyle Lincoln sighed helplessly, picked up a stone, softly chanted, Lin, and threw it far out the window. Boom! A sharp explosion suddenly echoed. The sound wasn't too loud, more like a television falling from the third floor. But the noise was enough to scare William White. He fell to the ground, staring wide-eyed out the window. The flower pots outside were shattered into pieces, with soil and flowers scattered who knows where. Wow, the stone is amazing! Bianca White exclaimed excitedly, running up to Kyle Lincoln and reaching for a stone. This isn't a toy, don't mess around with it. William White suddenly scrambled up from the ground, snatching the stone from Bianca White's hand. Carefully gathering the stones on the table, he shakily approached Kyle Lincoln, handing them back with trembling hands. You're not helping me, you're trying to get me killed. Take these back. Bianca White frowned and quickly stepped in front of William White, saying, Dad, what are you doing? Brother Kyle gave you these stones to protect you from Rowan Red causing trouble. Why are you giving them back? Be quiet. This doesn't concern you. William White snapped sternly, his eyes wide, scaring Bianca White into silence. Kyle Lincoln, I must have been blind not to recognize you as a master before. Today, I've seen it clearly. This small house can't accommodate a great figure like you. You should leave quickly and take these stones with you. I don't dare keep them, William White pleaded, looking at Kyle Lincoln with a face full of desperation. Kyle Lincoln sighed helplessly, taking a step back. Uncle William, I'm helping you, yet now you want to chase me away. That's a bit unreasonable, don't you think? Ridiculous. Kyle Lincoln had just discovered that William's wine cellar contained inebriating blossom, something he needed to restore his spiritual energy. Leaving now? Not a chance. We're just ordinary people. Clearly, we didn't recognize Mount Tai when it stood before us. Are you from some special forces or a mercenary sent to complete a mission? We don't want to get involved. Please spare us, we don't want to play this game. William White pleaded, his aged face filled with terror as he looked at Kyle Lincoln. After listening for a while, Kyle Lincoln finally understood. Not only did William White fail to appreciate his help, but because the stone was so powerful, he had mistaken Kyle for some kind of supernatural figure. In Kyle Lincoln's era, the stone was nothing special. It couldn't even harm a person, let alone touch a strand of hair. But in the 21st century, it was different, it had the power of half a grenade. If it exploded near someone, it could genuinely maim them. Uncle William, don't worry. I'm nobody special, just an ordinary person who was abandoned and nearly killed. These stones are something I brought with me, they have nothing to do with me. If you don't want them, fine. Kyle Lincoln took the stones back and turned to leave. Chapter 18, The Uncontrollable Rage. Bianca White stood anxiously by the side, quickly rushing to Kyle Lincoln, grabbing his arm, and looking at William White as she said, Father, what are you doing? Kyle just made you such excellent wine yesterday, and today you're driving him away. Don't you want to make money anymore? William White froze, a glimmer of greed flashing in his eyes. Just thinking about yesterday's accounts made him unable to suppress a smile. Money, or life? William White's mind was in turmoil, weighing the two things he valued most, both of which he was reluctant to part with. Unless you agree to make this wine for me from now on, otherwise, I'll let you go. William White hesitated for a long time before gritting his teeth and speaking. Kyle Lincoln let out a sigh of relief and quickly replied, "No problem, Uncle William. Since I'm here with you, of course, I'll work. From now on, I'll be responsible for making wine for you." "Fine, fine, go, go. I'm tired of seeing the two of you." William White waved them off impatiently, shaking his head as he returned to his tasks. Bianca White chuckled softly, grabbing Kyle Lincoln's large hand without looking at him, and led him out of White's wandering kitchen. Kyle Lincoln followed her with a satisfied expression. Bianca White's small hand was smooth and soft, like silk, warm and tender in his grasp. Unable to resist, he gently squeezed it. "Ah! Kyle, what are you doing?" Bianca White exclaimed, quickly pulling her hand back. Her face flushed red with embarrassment. Sorry, I couldn't help myself," Kyle Lincoln said awkwardly, scratching his nose. Bianca White huffed at him and ignored him, striding forward quickly. Kyle Lincoln grinned sheepishly and followed her as they moved ahead. Bianca White was leading Kyle Lincoln to a place called the Mid-Sea Academy of Healing. It was considered the largest university in Mid-Sea and was renowned nationwide for its medical programs. Graduates from the Mid-Sea Academy of Healing were highly sought after by major hospitals, and even the personal doctors of the nation's leaders were alumni of this prestigious institution. This reputation had solidified the Academy's illustrious status. After walking for over half an hour, Bianca White and Kyle Lincoln finally arrived in front of an enormous campus. "Look, across this street, that's the Mid-Sea Academy of Healing," Bianca White said proudly, pointing to the massive academy ahead. Following her gaze, a trace of satisfaction appeared on Kyle Lincoln's face. In front of a towering, imposing gate at the center, its height straight and majestic, lay the academy. Inside were closely packed high-rise buildings, bustling with people moving about, including no shortage of girls with figures captivating enough to draw the attention of any young man. 5 large words caught the eye, carved into the stone wall beside the grand gate, prompting Kyle Lincoln to mutter, "Mid-Sea Academy of Healing." By the 25th century, the traditional school system had long been abolished. All educational institutions were centralized, and every subject was taught virtually, transmitted directly into the brain through advanced technology. As long as one could absorb the information, it was considered equivalent to completing all university programs. This 21st century style school was something Kyle Lincoln was witnessing for the first time. "Those legs are so fair." Kyle Lincoln's eyes were glued to a female student in a short skirt, and he nearly drooled. Cultivating the 9 needles of the sun god came with a major drawback, an overabundance of yang energy. Without yin energy to balance it, deviations in cultivation could occur, leading to inner turmoil or even failure during tribulation, resulting in death.